Hello, I'm Ed Dye. I got very interested in solutions to what I recognized as a serious threat from continuing to burn fossil fuels back in the late 70s, when President Carter first put solar panels on the White House. It was nearly 30 years before we could afford to put solar panels on the roof, largely, I believe, to the misinformation campaign of the fossil fuel industry. I have never been politically active, but after watching the lack of concern about the climate crisis continuing to dominate the news media, I realized that I had to speak out and assist with spreading the truth about the climate crisis. So in March of 2019, I traveled to Atlanta to be trained by Al Gore and become a climate reality leader. Though I've been committed to continue this fight, even in the face of unprecedented odds, I have recently learned about the potential of regenerative agriculture, which has given me new hope. I want to show you how adapting regenerative agricultural practices can solve the climate crisis. What's at stake? Our prairies are being turned into deserts by our agricultural practices. It's hard to bring life back into these soils. It takes several years, and the worse the desertification, the longer it takes. Moreover, our water table is running dry, exacerbated by the drought. But here again, our farming practices are making it worse. As to how much it contributes to global warming, the science is unclear. But it is the only contributor that, if corrected, has the potential to take carbon out of the air and put it back in the soil. This is critical for places like Florida. No scientist can tell us how long it will take for all the ice in Greenland and Antarctica to melt. But they tell us if it does, the seas will rise 260 feet, wiping the Florida Peninsula off the map. So the sooner we can take carbon out of the air, the sooner we can stop the melting. Regenerative agriculture's guiding principle is not just to farm sustainably. That implies mere maintenance of what might, after all, be a degraded status quo. But to farm in such a way is to improve the land. The movement emphasizes soil health and specifically the buildup of soil carbon. This happy coincidence is one reason why carbon farming advocates repeatedly describe their project as a win-win. Society could theoretically remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the earth, and at the same time enhance the fortunes of farmers and the overall stability of the nation's food supply. Now, farm-related emissions come in the form of methane from cows burping and large feces pits, and nitric oxide from synthetic fertilizers, which have a much greater effect on thickening the greenhouse gas layer. But it's also the transportation and energy used in the process of raising and processing meat and the food they need. We're seeing that conventional farming techniques are really destructive to the soils. Too much plowing is used. The soil erosion from conventional plowing is so much higher, and it's 100 times higher than the natural process by which soil is regenerated. Large deforestation is happening around the world to make room for more corn and soybeans for cattle feed, industrialized growing of palm oil, and more land for raising livestock. Now, the pie chart on the right shows the breakdown of various greenhouse gases. Clearly, carbon dioxide is the largest contributor by far, but the graph on the left shows the relative impact of each of these gases. So even though the quantities are smaller, their effects are much more substantial. So what is regenerative agriculture? It starts with understanding your soil, what it needs, and what combination of crops and cover crops will minimize weed growth and insect destruction so that chemicals can be eliminated. It eliminates tilling, keeps the ground covered with vegetation at all times, and integrates planned grazing techniques with livestock. The effect of practicing regenerative agriculture is that it restores soil health. For farmers, this means greater yields, the resiliencies of the soils to various stresses such as droughts and excess moisture. It decreases the need for outside input costs from fertilizer and pesticides, and it increases profits. For consumers, increases in soil health lead to more nutrient-dense foods. It creates pollinator-friendly environment and wildlife habitats. Further, it provides erosion control, pollution runoff control, and farm sequestration through photosynthesis. As such, it helps to reverse climate change. In short, it solves all the world's problems. So let's take a closer look at how this happens. Plants absorb carbon from the atmosphere during photosynthesis, producing simple sugars and other related compounds. Plants then invest a substantial portion of these carbon-rich compounds into the soil in order to feed specific groups of microorganisms, namely bacteria and fungi. They do this because they expect to receive nutrients in return. Bacteria and fungi use this carbon-rich food source to increase their numbers, building their bodies predominantly from carbon. Fungal hyphae can remain intact in the soil for hundreds of years and are thereby capable of locking up large quantities of carbon in the soil. Now, regenerative grazing is a principle-driven agricultural practice of building soil health by managing livestock on perennial and annual forages. As such, it supports human and ecosystem health, farm profitability, and community and food system resilience. Regenerative grazing is only one ingredient of regenerative agriculture. It aims to rejuvenate agricultural landscapes and communities, not degrade or just sustain them. Regenerative grazing is not a formula or a recipe. It relies on observation and adaptive management of system needs. Regenerative grazing provides a healthier food for livestock that significantly reduces the burping that produces the methane, and the feces become fertilizer for the soil, which is broken down by insects and microbes, also significantly reducing methane emissions. And the sequestering of carbon in the soil has probably the biggest potential of any single measure to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. Dr. Ratan Lal just won the World Food Prize in June of last year. He did a peer-reviewed studies with some others a couple of years ago showing that the technical potential for pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere by sequestering carbon in the soil is more than 150 parts per million. That's almost the entire difference between pre-industrialized times and now. But that phrase, technical potential, means that it's not necessarily what's likely to happen. But it does measure what could happen if we have the political will. And it gives us a measure of the very large amounts of carbon sequestration that we can expect if we adopt regenerative agriculture techniques. Fortunately, there is already a movement worldwide to adapt these practices. The International Initiative 4 per 1,000, launched by France on December 1st, 2015 at the COP21, where more than 100 nations, nonprofits, and NGOs signed on giving their official support to the program, which promotes sequestering carbon in the soil. The French have what we in the US see as a funny way of describing what is 0.4%. This initiative proposes that if the carbon level of soil is increased by 0.4% per year in the first 30 to 40 centimeters of soil, the annual increases of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would be significantly reduced. Countries that have signed the 4 per 1,000 initiative include Canada, nearly all of the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, and many developing countries. But I'm sorry to say, not the United States or China, the worst offenders. Your mission is to spread the word. Global warming can be reversed using nature to rebalance our environment. It can be done without waiting for technological advancements in carbon removal. It can be done before 2040. The best movie to understand regenerative agriculture is Kiss the Ground. It reveals that by regenerating the world's soils, we can completely and rapidly stabilize the Earth's climate, restore lost ecosystems, and create abundant food supplies. Using compelling graphics and visuals, along with striking NASA and NOAA footage, the film artfully illustrates how, by drawing down atmospheric carbon, soil is the missing piece of the climate puzzle. This movie is positioned to catalyze a movement to accomplish the impossible, to solve humanity's greatest challenge, to balance the climate and secure our species' future. Thank you.